My name is the one my father forgot to mention when he raised his glass on Christmas Eve right before he tried to take my home. I didn't know it yet, not standing there in my winter coat with a wrapped gift under my arm, but that night would end with a lawyer pressing papers toward me and a sheriff asking my father to step aside. People think moments like that explode out of nowhere. They don't. They're built quietly, one small exclusion at a time. I grew up in a regular American house on a regular street, the kind with mailboxes all lined up and neighbors who wave even when they don't know your name. My father believed in order, routine, and appearances. Dinner at 6, church on Sunday, family holidays photographed and posted. I believed in those things too once. I believed if I showed up, if I stayed kind, if I didn't make trouble, I'd always belong. That Christmas, I drove to my father's place with the radio low and snow tapping the windshield. I hadn't been invited, not exactly, but I'd been told, "We're keeping it simple this year." Simple can mean many things. I took it to mean informal quiet, maybe just the four of us. I baked a pie anyway. Old habits die hard. When I pulled into the driveway, there were cars everywhere. My brother's truck, his wife's SUV, another car I didn't recognize. Lights glowed warm through the windows. Laughter drifted out when the door opened for someone else. I sat in my car longer than I should have, watching my breath fog the windshield, trying to decide if I was welcome or just tolerated. I knocked. A neighbor passing by smiled and said, "Didn't know you were coming too." Too. That word landed harder than it should have. Inside, no one looked surprised to see me. That should have told me everything. My father hugged me stiffly like I was a guest who arrived early. My brother barely looked up from his phone. My stepmother took the pie and said she'd put it somewhere. There was no place set for me at the table, not even an extra chair. When my father raised his glass later, he talked about family blessings and sticking together. He thanked my brother for stepping up this year. He didn't say my name once. I smiled through it. I always did. But something in me went quiet like a door closing. I left before dessert. No one stopped me. Christmas morning, my phone was silent. No text, no call. Just a photo online of the family in matching sweaters, my father's arm around my brother. Everyone smiling like the picture would last forever. That afternoon, I walked through an open house downtown. I wasn't looking for anything dramatic. I wanted a place that felt solid, safe. The Penthouse wasn't flashy. It was practical luxury. Good bones, clean lines, a view of the river that reminded me the world keeps moving whether families do or not. I bought it in my own name, paid carefully, legally, quietly. I didn't tell anyone. For a while, peace followed. Then my father started calling. Friendly at first. Curious. He asked questions about the city, about my plans. He said things like, "We're proud of you," the way people say things when they want something later. A few weeks after New Year's, the building manager called me. She said a man claiming to be my father had asked about my unit, about ownership, about paperwork. I thanked her and called my attorney. I'd learned slowly and the hard way that calm questions deserve prepared answers. The next Saturday they showed up. My father, my brother, and a lawyer I didn't recognize. They stood in my living room like they belonged there. The lawyer laid out documents, neatly smiling as if this were a favor. My father said my brother needed stability, that this was temporary. That family helps family. Then he said, "Sign it." I asked for time, copies, an explanation. The lawyer talked faster. My brother crossed his arms and said I was overreacting. My father said I was being selfish. They thought I was alone. They didn't know I had my own lawyer on the line. They didn't know the building's cameras were recording every word. And they didn't know that if things went any further, a sheriff would be standing exactly where my father was. That's where the story really begins. But it started long before that, on a cold Christmas night when I finally understood what being left out actually meant. I didn't slam the door after they left. I didn't shout either. I waited until the elevator swallowed their footsteps and the hallway went quiet, then locked my front door with a steady hand and leaned my forehead against it. My living room looked the same, lamp glowing, a mug on the side table, yet everything felt altered, as if their papers had scratched a line across the floor. I watched their car pull away from the curb, my father in the passenger seat, my brother driving the lawyer in back like he belonged there. I thought about calling my father to say something sharp, but anger, at least the loud kind, has never been where I live. I've always been the one who keeps her voice even, who chooses her words. For years, people praised that calm as maturity. Now I wondered if it was just training. I called my attorney, the one who handled my purchase. Her name was Marlene. She was in her late 50s, practical, the sort of woman who listened without theatrics. When I told her what happened, she didn't gasp. She went straight to facts. "Did you sign anything?" she asked. "No." "Did they leave copies?" "They tried not to." "Good," she said. "That was an ambush. Do not meet with them alone again. If they want to discuss property, it happens through counsel. Period." Her voice steadied me because she treated the situation like what it was: real, messy, and solvable. That night I slept in pieces. By morning my phone was already lighting up. Dad calling. I let it ring, twice. Then my brother texted, "Don't make this a big deal." A few minutes later, Dad's really upset. That one made me laugh, and the sound surprised me, as if my father were the injured party. As if showing up with a lawyer to corner me in my own home was some kind of family misunderstanding. I didn't respond. I made coffee. I opened the blinds. The city looked ordinary, like it didn't care about my father's opinion. That helped. I even found myself doing something I hadn't done in months. I called my Aunt Lorraine, my mother's older sister. She's in her 70s and has a way of speaking the truth without raising her voice. I didn't give her every detail. I just said Dad showed up with a lawyer. Lorraine went quiet, then said, "Baby, that's not family business. That's business. Keep it in writing. And don't you sign a thing under pressure." Hearing it from someone her age made it land differently, like a rule handed down for survival. If you'd asked me years ago why my father always took my brother's side, I would have given you a polite answer. Boys are different. He needs help. Don't hold grudges. In truth, my brother fit the picture my father wanted: charming, loud, always surrounded by people. He gave my father grandkids and stories to tell. I gave him quiet competence, which in my father's mind meant I could absorb the sacrifice. I'd been absorbing it since I was young. When my brother struggled, my father called it a rough patch. When I struggled, my father called it life. When my brother asked, my father moved money, made calls, smoothed roads. When I asked for anything: time, attention, fairness, I was told to be understanding. I used to mistake that for strength. Around noon, Marlene emailed me a short, firm letter, polite on the surface, steel underneath. It stated that I was the sole owner of my penthouse. It directed all communication about my property to her office. It warned that any further attempts to pressure me into transferring ownership could be treated as harassment and potential fraud. Nothing dramatic, just clear. I forwarded it to my father with one line: "Please respect this." 5 minutes later, he called again. This time I answered. Not because I wanted an argument, but because I wanted to hear what he sounded like when he realized he couldn't bully me quietly. "Why are you doing this?" he started, as if I'd attacked him. "Why are you involving lawyers? We're family." "You came to my home with a lawyer," I said. "You tried to force me to sign papers." "That's not what happened," he snapped. "We were trying to talk like adults. Your brother needs help." "I'm not signing anything." Silence. Then his voice softened the way it used to when I was a teenager, and he wanted me to agree without arguing. "Honey, it's temporary. He'll make the payments, just until he gets back on his feet." Back on his feet from what I asked. He hesitated. In that pause, I heard the truth. He didn't know the details, or he didn't want to admit them. He was helping my brother the way he always had, blindly, out of habit, out of fear that his son's problems reflected on him. "You're making this hard," he said. "No," I replied, "you are." Then came the sentence that had trained me to swallow my needs for years. "After everything I've done for you." I didn't bite. "If you want to talk, you can talk to Marlene." He hung up. I sat there, phone in my hand, noticing something strange. My hands weren't shaking. That was new. Maybe boundaries are like muscles, you don't feel them until you start using them. That evening, I called my building manager and asked her to flag anyone asking about my unit. I also asked her to preserve the lobby camera footage from the day my father came. She didn't act shocked. She simply said, "Of course, like protecting residents was part of regular life." Later, with the sun slipping behind the buildings, I thought about the version of me who would have apologized, who would have offered a compromise just to make the tension stop. That version of me was tired. I didn't want revenge the way people imagine it, screaming humiliation, some grand public spectacle. I wanted something quieter and harder, the truth in plain daylight with witnesses. I wanted the old pattern to end. And if my father insisted on dragging my home into his story, then I would write the next chapter with new rules. They didn't wait long before trying again. 3 days after Marlene's letter went out, my father emailed me from his old account, the one he used when he wanted things to feel personal. He wrote that he was hurt, confused, and disappointed that I'd escalated matters. He said lawyers had no place in family conversations. He said we should meet and talk face-to-face, no pressure, no paperwork, just coffee like adults. If this story had been written 10 years earlier, I might have agreed. I might have believed the word coffee meant calm. Experience had taught me otherwise. I forwarded the email to Marlene. She replied with one line, "If you meet, I attend." I told my father yes under conditions, neutral location, business hours, my attorney present. He agreed too quickly. That should have warned me. The meeting was set for Friday morning at a small conference room near my building, a space Marlene often used for closings and mediations. It had a long table-framed prints on the wall and a glass door that made everything visible from the hall. Nothing about it felt intimate. That was the point. I arrived early. Marlene was already there, arranging her legal pad, calm as a metronome. She asked me again if I felt pressured or unsafe. I told her no, but I didn't feel respected either. She nodded. Then we document. At 10 on the dot, the door opened. My father walked in first, jaw-set, coat still on like he planned to leave quickly. My brother followed, eyes scanning the room. Behind them was the same lawyer from my living room, dark suit, practiced smile, holding a thin folder like a prop he expected to use. So much for just coffee. Marlene didn't rise. She didn't frown. She simply said, "Good morning. Please have a seat." Her voice held no invitation to misbehave. My father glanced at me, then at Marlene. "I didn't know she'd be here," he said. "She's my counsel," I replied. "You brought yours." The lawyer sat smoothing his tie. "We're hoping to resolve this amicably," he said, already opening the folder. Marlene raised one finger. "Before you proceed," she said evenly, "we need to clarify the purpose of this meeting." The lawyer smiled wider. "To finalize a family arrangement." My brother leaned back, arms crossed. "It's simple," he said. "We just need her signature." There it was again, just... Marlene turned to me. "Do you consent to discussing any transfer of ownership today?" "No," I said. My voice didn't wobble. "I don't." The lawyer paused, then continued anyway, sliding papers toward me as if repetition could wear me down. "This would allow your brother temporary use of the property. You'd remain involved." "That is not accurate," Marlene said. She flipped one page, then another. "This document assigns beneficial interest and grants authority to encumber the asset. That is not temporary." My father's face darkened. "You're twisting words." "No," Marlene said. "I'm reading them." The room felt smaller then. My brother started talking faster, explaining his situation, how he was in a bind, how lenders were circling, how he needed something solid to stabilize things. He said it was only fair. He said I didn't need the place. He said Dad had always intended things to be shared. I watched my father while my brother spoke. He stared at the table, jaw tight, as if the truth embarrassed him. When my brother finished, Dad looked up at me. "Just sign it," he said quietly. "Don't humiliate us." That word humiliate cut deeper than anger ever had. As if my refusal, my ownership, my existence outside his control was a public shame. "I'm not signing anything," I said. "And you need to leave." The lawyer cleared his throat. "If you don't cooperate, we may have to pursue other remedies." Marlene leaned forward for the first time. "If you threaten my client again," she said calmly, "we will pursue ours." Silence settled heavy and unmistakable. My father stood abruptly. "You've changed," he said to me, not as an observation but an accusation. "No," I replied. "I've stopped pretending." They left soon after, chairs scraping louder than necessary. Through the glass, I watched them argue in the hallway. My brother animated my father, rubbing his temples, the lawyer nodding as if this were all part of the plan. When the door closed, Marlene exhaled. That, she said, was coercion. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," she said, "we prepare." She explained my options carefully. A cease and desist, a restraining order if needed, documentation of every attempt they'd made to pressure me, preservation of recordings and building footage. And if they returned again without permission, a civil standby from the sheriff's office to keep the peace. I didn't like the sound of that, not because it was wrong, but because it was final. It meant admitting my father wasn't going to stop on his own. That afternoon I sat alone in my penthouse, the city moving steadily below. I thought about how my father used to tell me that independence was admirable as long as it didn't interfere with family plans. I realized something then that felt both sad and relieving. The ambush wasn't a mistake, it was a strategy. And strategies don't end until they fail publicly. If my father wanted papers, witnesses, and authority, I would give him all three on my terms. After that meeting, something settled into place inside me, not anger exactly, but clarity. The kind that arrives when you finally stop asking why and start asking what now. My father wasn't confused. He wasn't misguided. He was committed. And commitment, even when it's wrong, requires a response that's steady and prepared. Marlene called it a pattern review. I called it facing reality. We met again the following Monday. Same conference room. Same calm light through the glass. This time there were no surprises. She laid out a timeline on yellow legal paper, each event written in careful block letters. The Christmas exclusion, the unannounced visit with a lawyer, the attempted sign-over, the pressure, the threats. Seeing it written down made it undeniable. This wasn't family disagreement, it was a campaign. People think documentation is about revenge, Marlene said, tapping the page. It's not, it's about protection. She explained my rights plainly, the way people my parents' age appreciate: no drama, no jargon, ownership, consent, coercion. She explained how easy it is for families to cross lines when money enters the room, especially when one child has always been treated as the backup plan. Then she asked me the question that mattered. If they come back, what do you want to happen? I didn't answer right away. I pictured my father's face the last time I'd seen him, tight with frustration, wounded pride, something brittle beneath it all. I didn't want him arrested. I didn't want a scene in the lobby. I wanted the truth to stand on its own. I want it to stop, I said, cleanly. She nodded. Then we make sure the next interaction is witnessed, recorded, and structured. That's when she laid out the plan. If my father insisted on another meeting, and he would, we'd schedule it. Not at my home, not at a cafe. Somewhere neutral, professional, and visible. There would be notice and agenda and counsel present on both sides. Everything above board. The cameras weren't a trick, they were standard. The building already had them. The conference room had them. All legally maintained, all properly disclosed. Nothing hidden, nothing sneaky. As for the sheriff, Marlene was clear. This isn't about force, it's about boundaries. A civil standby is there to prevent escalation, not cause it. I'd grown up believing sheriffs were for criminals or emergencies. Marlene reminded me they were also there to keep the peace when emotions threatened to override judgment, especially in family disputes where people felt entitled. The idea sat heavy in my chest. Calling a sheriff on my own father felt like crossing an invisible line. But then I remembered something Aunt Lorraine once told me after her own messy inheritance dispute. The line gets crossed when respect leaves the room. By Wednesday, the messages started again. My brother emailed first. Long rambling paragraphs about stress, pressure, expectations. He mentioned my father's health. He mentioned how disappointed Mom would have been. He mentioned everything except accountability. Then my father texted, "We need to finish this, Friday." I forwarded it to Marlene. She replied with a proposed meeting time, location, and terms. She included a simple note. "This meeting will be recorded. Any further pressure will end the discussion." My father agreed within minutes. That frightened me more than if he'd argued. Thursday night I barely slept. Not because I feared what might happen, but because I grieved what already had. There's a quiet sadness in realizing the person who taught you right from wrong is willing to bend both when it suits him. Friday morning I dressed simply. White blouse, dark slacks, no jewelry beyond my watch. I wanted nothing to distract from the words themselves. When I arrived, Marlene was already there reviewing notes. The room smelled faintly of coffee and paper. Outside the hallway hummed with ordinary office life. At 10:15 the door opened. My father entered with my brother close behind. The lawyer followed, carrying a thicker folder this time, his expression confident, almost rehearsed. I noticed my father's eyes flick briefly to the ceiling, then to the corners of the room. He knew. He just hoped it wouldn't matter. Marlene opened the meeting. She outlined the agenda calmly. Ownership status, prior attempts to transfer, the legal position. She spoke slowly, deliberately, the way you speak when you want everyone to understand, not just hear. The lawyer tried to interrupt. Marlene raised a hand. "You'll have time," she said. "Let's establish facts first." My father shifted in his chair. My brother tapped his foot. When it was my turn, I spoke plainly. I said I was not transferring my property. I said I would not be pressured. I said future communication must go through counsel. No apologies, no explanations. My father's face reddened. "You're making this public," he said. "Dragging strangers into family matters." I met his eyes. "You did that when you brought a lawyer to my home." He opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. For the first time, he seemed unsure of his footing. The lawyer leaned forward. "If you won't cooperate," he said, "we'll explore other avenues." Marlene's voice was calm but firm. "If you continue down that path, we'll consider it harassment. At that point, we'll involve law enforcement for civil standby if necessary." The word law enforcement hung in the air like a line drawn in chalk. There was a knock at the door. A uniformed sheriff stepped inside, polite, unhurried. "Morning," he said. "Just here to observe." No hand on a weapon, no raised voice, just presence. My father stared at him, then at me. Something in his expression cracked, not fear, but recognition. The realization that this wasn't a private family corner anymore. This was real life with rules he couldn't rewrite. And in that moment I understood something clearly: power doesn't vanish when challenged. It reveals itself. The sheriff didn't sit. He stood near the door with his hands folded, eyes neutral, as if he were watching the weather rather than a family coming apart. His presence changed the temperature of the room immediately. Voices lowered, movements slowed. Even the lawyer seemed to choose his words more carefully. Marlene nodded to the sheriff, then turned back to the table. "Let's continue," she said, as if nothing unusual had happened. That was her strength, treating boundaries as normal, not dramatic. My father cleared his throat. "This is unnecessary," he said, glancing again at the uniform. "We're not criminals." "No one said you were," Marlene replied. "We're here to prevent misunderstandings." My brother leaned forward, irritation flashing across his face. "This is ridiculous. She's blowing things out of proportion." I felt something steady settle in my chest. Not courage exactly, something quieter. Resolve. "You came to my home with a lawyer and documents I didn't ask for," I said. "You told me to sign them on the spot." "That's not what happened," my father said sharply. Marlene turned a page on her pad. "According to the building footage and the timeline we've documented," she said, "that is exactly what happened." The lawyer shifted in his seat. "We were attempting a family solution," he said. "Nothing more." Marlene met his eyes. "Then you chose the wrong tools." She slid a copy of the document across the table, not to me, but toward my father. "Do you understand what this paper does?" she asked him directly. My father frowned, scanning it. He looked confused, then defensive. "It gives my son temporary use." "It transfers authority," Marlene said. "It exposes her to your son's debts. It allows liens. It limits her control over her own property. If signed under pressure, it could constitute fraud." My father's face drained of color. "That's not what I was told." My brother snapped his head toward the lawyer. "You said it was fine." The lawyer held up his hands. "It's standard language." "For banks," Marlene replied, "not for families pretending this is casual." The sheriff shifted slightly. "Not threatening, just present," my father noticed. "This was supposed to be simple," he muttered. "It was," I said softly, "until you tried to take something that wasn't yours." He looked at me then, not as a child, not as a problem to be managed, but as someone standing firm. I saw anger there, and something else underneath it. Fear, maybe. Fear of losing control. Fear of admitting he'd crossed a line. My brother broke the silence. "So what, you're just going to let me drown?" he asked me. "You have all this and you won't help." "I will help," I said, "just not by giving up my home." "That's the same thing," he shot back. "No," I replied, "it isn't." Marlene stepped in again. "There are legitimate ways to assist someone in financial distress," she said. "Counseling, payment plans, downsizing. None of those involve coercing a third party into transferring assets." My father rubbed his temples. He looked suddenly older than his years. I did what I thought was right, he said. I was trying to keep the family together. I felt the weight of that sentence settle between us. How many times had I been told to bend for that reason? How many times had family meant my silence? Keeping the family together shouldn't mean breaking one person, I said. The sheriff cleared his throat gently. Sir, he said to my father, no one's in trouble here. But I do need to make it clear that any further pressure or attempts to obtain signatures against her will would require us to step in more formally. My father nodded slowly. I understand. For the first time that day, he sounded uncertain. Marlene closed her folder. Then we're done here, she said. There will be no transfer. Any further communication goes through counsel. Agreed. The lawyer hesitated, then nodded. My brother looked away. My father said nothing, but he didn't argue. We stood, chairs scraped back. The meeting ended not with shouting, but with something more uncomfortable clarity. As they filed out, my father paused at the door. He looked at me, opened his mouth, then closed it again. Whatever he wanted to say, he wasn't ready to say it with witnesses present. When the door shut behind them, I exhaled. My shoulders ached like I'd been holding them up all morning. Marlene gave me a small smile. You did exactly what you needed to do. The sheriff nodded once before leaving. You handled yourself well, he said, and then he was gone too. I sat alone for a moment, listening to the hum of the building. No victory speech, no celebration, just the quiet aftermath of standing your ground. I knew this wasn't over, not emotionally, but the rules had changed. The old pattern, the one where I was expected to absorb discomfort so others could stay comfortable, had finally been interrupted. And for the first time I felt something close to peace, not because I'd won, but because I hadn't given in. After the meeting, the silence was louder than the arguments had been. Days passed without messages. No calls, no emails forwarded through lawyers. It felt unnatural, like waiting for thunder that never comes. I kept expecting my phone to buzz with my father's name, but it didn't. Instead, what arrived was a different kind of noise, the truth slipping out in pieces. Marlene called me late one afternoon. I need to update you, she said. Her tone was neutral, but I could hear the significance underneath it. She told me my brother's lawyer, their lawyer, had reached out privately asking about possible alternatives. Payment plans, mediation, anything that didn't involve my property. That tells me something, Marlene said. They're running out of leverage. I thanked her and hung up, then sat at my kitchen counter staring at the city below. For the first time, I wasn't bracing myself. I was observing. That distance made room for memories I'd avoided. Growing up, my brother and I were never compared out loud. It was subtler than that. When he failed, my father rallied. When I succeeded, my father nodded. Approval came with conditions, and I learned early which ones I could meet. The cost was invisible at first. Only later did I realize I'd been paying with my voice. 2 weeks after the meeting, my father called. Not a text, not an email, a call. That alone told me this wasn't about strategy anymore. I answered. I didn't know how bad it was, he said without greeting. His voice sounded tired. Your brother's debts. The lawsuits. I didn't know. I didn't interrupt. Silence has a way of inviting honesty. He told me he needed help, my father continued. I believed him. I thought if we could just get him something solid, something to calm the waters, it would all straighten out. And you chose my home, I said gently. Yes, he didn't argue it, because you're stable, you always have been. There it was, not malice, assumption. I needed you to be stable too, I said. I needed you to protect me. He sighed. I didn't see it that way. I know. He paused, then said something that surprised me. The lawyer told me afterward what those papers actually meant, about the risk to you. I closed my eyes, and I felt sick, he said, that I almost pushed my daughter into something I didn't understand. That was the moment the story shifted not into forgiveness, not yet, but into truth, the kind that doesn't excuse but explains. He told me more then, about my brother's failed investments, about guarantees he'd signed without reading, about the fear that if he didn't fix it, everything he'd built would collapse. He admitted he'd been ashamed to ask for help, ashamed to admit his son wasn't okay. I thought if I handled it quietly, no one would know, he said. Quietly, I repeated, by forcing me to sign papers. I know, he said, I know. We didn't talk long. He didn't apologize in the way movies script apologies. He didn't cry. He didn't ask me to fix anything. He just said I crossed a line, and for him that was enormous. After we hung up, I sat with the weight of it. Understanding doesn't erase harm, but it does change how you carry it. A few days later, Marlene forwarded me documents. My brother's attorney had submitted requests for debt counseling, a proposal to downsize a plan that didn't involve me at all. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't easy. It was responsible. That mattered. My father and I met again weeks later, this time alone at a quiet diner near his house. The kind with vinyl booths and coffee refills you don't have to ask for. No lawyers, no papers, just two people trying to relearn each other. He looked older, not weaker, just stripped of illusion. We talked about small things first: weather, neighbors, how the holidays sneak up faster every year. Then he said I should have invited you to Christmas. I nodded, yes. I didn't know how he admitted. Your brother was already in trouble. I didn't want tension. Tension happens when things are hidden, I said, not when they're shared. He listened, really listened. That was new. I can't undo what I did, he said, but I want to do better. I'm not asking you to choose between us, I said. I'm asking you to treat us fairly. He agreed, not eagerly, thoughtfully, like someone who finally understood the stakes. We didn't hug when we left. That would have been too much too soon. But he touched my shoulder briefly and said my name the way he used to when I was young, without expectation attached. Driving home, I realized something important. Justice doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like boundaries held long enough for the truth to surface. I still live in my penthouse. I still pay my bills. I still keep my documents in order. My brother is working through consequences he can't hand off anymore. My father is learning late in life that love isn't proven by control. And me, I learned that being calm doesn't mean being quiet. It means being clear. The next Christmas came quietly. No surprise visits, no lawyers, no paper slid across tables. Just a simple invitation mailed instead of texted, addressed to me by name. My father's handwriting was careful, slower than it used to be, as if each letter mattered more now. Christmas Eve dinner. We'd really like you there. I held the card longer than I expected. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's a door you decide whether to open and how wide. I went. I arrived early, as I always had. The house looked the same from the outside, but inside something felt different. Fewer decorations, fewer people, no forced cheer. My father met me at the door and stepped aside, letting me enter first. It was a small thing. It mattered. Dinner was quieter than the years before. My brother wasn't there. That was his choice, I'd been told. He was focusing on getting things straight. I didn't ask questions. Some paths are meant to be walked alone. My father said grace before the meal. He didn't make a speech. He didn't perform gratitude. He simply thanked God for another year and for the people at the table. And this time he said my name. After dinner, we sat with coffee while the snow drifted outside the window. The television played softly in the background, some old movie neither of us was really watching. At one point, my father cleared his throat. I've been meeting with a counselor, he said, staring into his mug. For parents, older parents. I looked at him surprised. They talk about favoritism, he continued, about how easy it is to confuse helping with control, especially when one child always seems strong. I waited. They said something that stuck, he said. That strength isn't permission, it's trust. That landed heavier than any apology could have. I can't promise I'll always get it right, he said, but I won't put you in that position again. I believed him not because his words were perfect, but because his behavior had changed. He no longer asked about my finances. He didn't suggest solutions to problems that weren't his to solve. He let silence exist without rushing to fill it. In the months that followed, life returned to its ordinary rhythms. My brother worked through debt repayment with professional help. It was slow, humbling, necessary. My father stopped trying to rescue him with shortcuts. That more than anything told me the lesson had taken root. As for me, I kept living the life I'd built. I hosted friends in my penthouse. I volunteered. I paid attention to my health, my peace, my future. I didn't harden. I didn't gloat. I simply stood where I belonged. People sometimes ask if I regret involving lawyers, if I wish I'd handled it within the family. I tell them this families are healthiest when they respect the same rules as the rest of the world, consent, clarity, and accountability. Especially for those of us raised to believe keeping the peace was our highest duty. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself, if you've ever been the dependable one, the quiet one, the one expected to give because you can, I want you to hear something clearly. Boundaries are not betrayal. Documentation is not disrespect. Asking for help does not mean you love your family less. It means you love yourself enough to stay whole. And if you're a parent listening, especially one who's lived a long life full of responsibility, know this too: fairness matters at every age. What feels like protection can feel like pressure to the person receiving it. Love grows best where choices are honored. I didn't win anything in a courtroom. I didn't humiliate anyone. I didn't seek revenge. I chose steadiness over silence, clarity over compliance. And in doing so, I gave my family the only real chance it had to change. If this story made you think of someone you love or reminded you of a moment when you should have spoken up, I invite you to sit with that feeling. Share this story if it helps put words to something you've carried quietly. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, real, grounded, and honest, consider subscribing. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do at any age is say, "This is mine, and this is enough."